Hi, everyone. Welcome to another conversation where we're talking weather. Today, I have the privilege and opportunity to talk with Joel Gratz, who works with OpenSnow, helped found OpenSnow. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about this last winter and, in particular, get into its impact on our ski slopes and the ski season and potentially what does the future hold. I'm Danny Katz, CoPERD Executive Director, and I'm glad you all could join us. We'll put more information about some of the things that we talk about, including links to his information and his app down below if you want to follow up afterwards. So, Joel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, I guess just kind of big picture, you are one of many people who try to predict weather in the state of Colorado and actually outside of Colorado. Can you talk a little bit more about what is Open Snow and how did you come to, how did it come to be?
Yep. So I was afflicted with the weather weenie bug from an early age. So in elementary school, I knew I wanted to be a meteorologist. I studied it in college at Penn State. I studied it more here at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and I also thought in the back of my head, man, it would be really fun to have a business around weather. And when I moved out to Colorado from the East Coast, I discovered powder. There wasn't very much of that in Pennsylvania where I was
Yeah.
from, and I was immediately hooked. I was hooked for two reasons. One, skiing powder or fresh snow is incredibly fun. It's kind of a massively different experience than just skiing grimmers. Grimmers are fun, but
Yes.
powder is a whole nother level. But the second thing is it was an intellectual challenge to try to figure out how to forecast powder in the big mountains. And the weather models that we used 20 years ago when I started this, and even now in 2026, are not perfect at differentiating the amount of snow that's going to fall at one mountain versus another. So I took it upon myself because I am a selfish only child who wanted powder to try to figure it out. And I'm still working on it. And what started as an email list among friends grew to now a company with 15 full time folks. And we reach people all over the world that are seeking powder. So this is a dream job for me. And our product is an app and a website called OpenSnow, which is similar in many ways to other apps. However, it's super detailed around webcams, snow reports, how much snow is coming, trying to give people a heads up on should you be planning a powder day 4 months or 4 days in advance or 10 days in advance or something like that, which
Sure.
areas might be better, where can you find the most snow. So that's what we do. And we also help people on outdoor adventures outside of winter because we have forecast data that works and is tailored to the mountains all year round. But our main impact and focus is snow.
And as you said, you personally have a stake in this because you like the powder. I do too. Unfortunately I have to drive to get to it because I'm down here in Denver. Are you based in Colorado? Are you up in the mountains? Where are you?
Yeah, I live in Boulder, but we have good friends scattered around the state, and so we stay at friends' houses and try to be in the best position for any storm. You know, nobody should feel bad for me. My ski days are probably about 50 per year now. When I first started this, and I was had no family, and I was a late 20s single person, my ski days were closer to 70 or 80. But I love skiing. I love being out there, but I also love the intellectual challenge of running the business, the creative challenge of how do we build things that make sense to people so they can understand all these weather models. And so for me, it's not, I mean, the skiing is my love and I love doing it. But it's not just that. Like if I was only skiing, I get a little bit bored. So I'm glad that I get to spend plenty of time in the business as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, so let's get into it. So I think people who are watching this have probably heard and probably experienced, as did I, that this was a pretty bad winter when it came to snow. Can you give us some just macro, place us here in Colorado? How bad was it? Was this the worst? Was this one of the worst? What would you say?
Yeah, and all there is government data to use to answer that question, and then there's also looking at snow reports from ski areas. And so, by most measures, over the last 40 or 50 years, kind of from the 70s to 80s through now in the mid 2020s, this is probably about the worst, or the let me qualify that. This is probably the least amount of snow that Colorado has seen during winter. There was a winter 1976, 1977 was plus or minus this bad.
Yeah,
And that's some data according also to Tony Crocker, who has been keeping snowfall statistics for a long time at bestsnow.net. So I want to give credit where credit is
sure.
due there. But looking at that and government data, generally speaking, we're plus or minus half the amount of snow that we should get. And there have been other bad years between, or low snow years between the mid 70s and mid 2020s. But this one generally takes the cake. One thing I will say is looking at reconstructed data. So there are studies that go back and look at tree rings or sediment or just other avenues to try to piece together the climate 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Generally, those show wild swings between wet and dry periods. So my sense is that this is not the least amount of snow that Colorado has had during a season for the last hundreds or thousands of years. But in the lifetime of most people alive today, this is probably one of the worst, if not the worst or lowest snowpack winter that we've had.
Yeah. Were there any bright spots? Were there any months where we actually did all right, or were there any parts of the state of Colorado that did all right, or pretty much across the board?
Yeah, it was pretty much across the board. Sometimes, and it's a good question because sometimes the northern mountains will do better than the southern mountains, or vice versa. Or sometimes you have an amazing early season or late season, and then the other part of the season isn't great. I'm looking at when you look at the snowfall across Colorado through from October 1 through now in April, that snowfall has generally been below average the entire time. Sure, we've had cycles. We had a cycle kind of around Thanksgiving in early December. We had a cycle kind of in the middle of February, but those were really the only two blips that were great. Now there was still enough snow to ski in many
Yep.
places. There was still a snowpack. So Colorado is pretty remarkable in that our high elevation mountains ensure that even with warm temperatures and low snow, there is some snow somewhere. Usually to ski, it's just generally far less. And I also caveat all of this by saying that um, in there's a yin and a yang to weather. So usually, when one area of the world or country is not doing well in whatever framework you think about that is precipitation or snow or temperatures, another area is opposite. So the western United States and here in Colorado had very little snow this year, but the northeastern part of the United States had a lot of snow and cold temperatures. It was one of their best winters. In fact, another winter that looked really, really good in the Northeast was, wait for it, 1976, 1977. So you can kind of see the yin and the yang. When we're not in a good spot, the East Coast can be in a better spot. And so that's one piece of it. The other caveat to this whole thing is that the amount of precipitation in Colorado that fell was also quite low. It wasn't like it was just warm here and we didn't get snow, but we got a ton of rain. Like we didn't get very much precipitation at all. However, around the other parts of the Western United States, it was more a story of warmth than lack of precipitation. So
Hmm.
precipitation was often still a little bit below average, but somewhat close to average. It was just the warmth of this winter meant that a lot of that precipitation fell as rain versus snow at lower and mid elevations, or it melted out more quickly. So this winter was a story of not just kind of lack of snow, but really very warm temperatures.
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, since I have you, I also have to just ask the question that always is in my mind, which is why do some ski areas in Colorado seem to get more snow than others? Is there some, I mean, yeah, what's the factor that tends to go into that? It seems pretty consistently, Wolf Creek, every time I pull it up, it's got way more snow than some of the other places I ski. What's going on there?
Yeah, well, Wolf Creek is interesting, and they do get quite a bit of snow, and there's some other places in the state that get quite a bit of snow too. So there are two ingredients to meteorology. I maybe could have saved 4 years of college if I learned these two ingredients. No, I'm kidding. It was a great time, and I learned a lot. But the two ingredients to create snow, or really any type of interesting weather, but especially snow, are moisture and rising air or lift. So if you don't have more, I mean, this is pretty basic, but if you don't have moisture, you're not going to get something to fall out of the sky like rain or snow. The other thing is lift or rising air. So what we need to do is we need air to go up. As air goes up, it expands due to lower pressure, it cools, and then the moisture in the air is then able to condense into rain or snow. So we need moisture and we need lift. Generally speaking, in Colorado, you can trace the areas with the most snow to the areas that get the most moisture. So when we look at Wolf Creek's down in the southwestern part of the United States or of Colorado. When you get a wind from the southwest, that pulls in moisture directly from the Pacific Ocean through Southern California, through Arizona, through Southern Utah or Northern New Mexico and into Colorado. What you notice on that pathway from the Pacific Ocean kind of into Colorado is that there aren't a ton of big mountains in there. When you get big mountains, those big mountains kind of coax the atmosphere into producing rain or
Yeah.
snow. So you can get a lot of moisture from the Pacific Ocean into southern Colorado, which means that with the right wind direction, with a southwest wind, all other things being equal, you can get a lot of snow. So when you think about a place like Wolf Creek or other places in the central mountains of Colorado, like there's in the West Elk Mountains, kind of west of Aspen, west of Crested Butte, around the area of Marble, you get a lot of snow. That's not just because of moisture, but also because storms that hit northern Colorado, central Colorado, or southern Colorado, they're all kind of hitting that spot too. So that spot in the middle of Colorado can be hit by storms from any direction and can do pretty well also. So, and I'll wrap by saying this, that Wolf Creek and other areas around the West Elk Mountains often do get the most snow, but they don't, it's not that the northern mountains or other places don't get very much snow. It's just that a place like Wolf Creek or the Central Mountains, because they can get so much moisture, you can get 2 feet of snow in a day within
Yeah.
24 hours. You can get 24 inches in 24 hours. Whereas the northern mountains, along I-70, some of the more popular ski areas, it's more rare to get that much snow in a day because you just don't have the moisture. Now, these areas can still get 300 plus inches of snow per year, but it comes more in the 4 inches a day, 6 inches a day, 8 inches a
Yeah.
day, 10 inches a day concept because we just don't have the moisture to support that high snowfall rate.
Yeah. You mentioned it when you were talking about other in the West. Precipitation wasn't that far off, but it was the temperatures that seems to really hit. Can you talk a little bit? I mean, we hear we're in a warming climate. The numbers we hear don't sound that extreme, going up by a degree or 2 degrees or three
Yep.
degrees. Can you talk a little bit about how even just a degree or two can make a big impact on whether we get snow or not? Like, how that differential doesn't have to be that big.
Yep, and you can see this in so there's a weather station network called Snowtel, Snotel. That's about 1,000 backcountry weather stations, primarily measuring snow, not for skiers. They were installed to measure snow so that we could figure out how much water would run off from the mountains and fill lakes and streams and reservoirs in the spring and summer. However, this government network, which was installed in the 70s, 80s, and then a few more stations came online in the 90s and 2000s, has a useful trace and they're of snowpack going back 30, 40, 50 years. And they are at different elevations. So they are at very high elevations, they're at kind of medium elevations, and they're at kind of borderline, I would say, elevations where there's always kind of a snow rain issue, even here in Colorado. And what you can generally see is that the snowpack at those lower and mid elevations, there is a trend line down because just a little bit of warming means that, maybe, that if it was every other year that you would get a storm that might be some rain instead of snow, maybe that's a little bit more frequent. Or maybe between storms, it's just a little bit warmer. So you get a little bit more melting at the lower elevations that are generally a little bit warmer. So you can see that while the higher elevation stations don't show much of a trend or any trend in snowpack because they're still plenty cold and a degree or two of warming isn't changing that, it's the mid and especially lower elevation stations that were always kind of on the fence of rain, snow, or melting during the season that show a decrease in snowpack. And this is true across the West as well. Places that are closer to the coast, Washington, Oregon, California, that are always have had to deal with rain versus snow issues. Like that's always been, a degree or two here or there. Well, if you nudge it a degree or two warmer, you're just shifting the odds a little bit more toward potentially more rain or melt events versus
Yeah.
snow. I do want to say that while there is generally overwhelming evidence that for most places temperatures have been warming over the past 30 years, there is not overwhelming evidence that there has been a change in the amount of precipitation that has fallen, so total rain and snow. So a lot of people will say, oh, this year is, you know, indicative of climate change because we got so little precipitation. That's not the case. Now, if it's getting warmer and you get the same amount of precipitation on average, that has major impacts to what we do, how, you know, how much snow is falling, how much water is running off or is in the reservoirs, or does it go faster? So it's not just the same amount of water. If it gets locked up in the snowpack and then melts out slower in the
Yeah.
spring and the summer, that impacts ground recharge and other things differently. So you can kind of, you know, but what did Bob Dylan say? You don't need a meteorologist to know which way the wind blows. In this case, you don't need a meteorologist to understand that if you get the same amount of precipitation and it's warmer, you're just going to have impacts to the land, and the land's going to be drier due to more
Yeah.
evaporation and other things. So I don't want people to hear me and say, oh, it's not a big deal. We're getting the same amount of precipitation. Even with the same amount of precipitation in warmer temperatures, there are still impacts.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious, as somebody who born and raised in Colorado, how hard you do predictions all across the country. How hard is Colorado compared to other states? Are we an easier one? Are we a harder one to predict snowfall and ski season patterns?
Yeah, every location has its own challenges, and you know, we can make fun of Southern California because it's the same weather every day. However, there's a marine layer of low clouds and fog along the coast, and when that burns off, and you know, how far inland it extends is really challenging. It's challenging for flights, and you go to the beach and all. So even though we think certain areas of the country are, you know, easy, there's tricks everywhere. I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and well, we didn't have weather like we have in Colorado. If we got a nor'easter, a big snow, or you know, a big storm coming up the East Coast, a few miles one way or the other could make a difference between 20 inches of snow, 2 inches of sleet, or just pouring rain. Right.
Yeah, yeah,
So everywhere has its challenges. Colorado's big challenge is the mountains. The mountains stick up into the atmosphere. The mountains stick up into the atmosphere and create different kind of weather patterns and wind patterns that are difficult for our weather models to accurately forecast. And so this is how I got into this game in the first place. Is I saw, you know, a location that might have gotten a ton of snow. Like, why did Copper get so much more snow than, say, you know, Keystone or Beaver Creek or something like that? And they're only a handful of miles away from each other. And largely that has to do with the wind direction. So I spent the first part of, I don't know, you know, my career trying to figure out which wind directions are more favorable for certain mountains. And it's not a perfect science, or I should say, if we knew where every molecule of air was and AI could allow us to model them, then it would be a perfect science. But right now, we can't do either of those two things. But we have a decent idea of which wind directions work better for certain mountains, and we're slowly but surely trying to adjust the computer models to account for this. So at the beginning stages of OpenSnow, and even now, like, I write and other forecasters write a daily snow, meaning I share my thoughts kind of every day of where we think the snow is going to be best. And I put in there, hey, this northwest wind could increase snow totals above what the models think for these certain areas, or decrease totals somewhere else. We're working on trying to incorporate these concepts into the algorithms that we use to forecast. So it's
yeah.
less, you know, what's in Joel's brain, and more, can we prove this kind of scientifically, and then create the algorithms to, you know, day in and day out account for this. But we're not
Yeah.
there yet, but that's the path.
Yeah. Well, so I guess that gets into my second to last question here, which is just around data. I mean, it seems like you're only as good as the information that you're able to get. I guess where do you rely on information? How important is it that we as a society are investing in the snow monitoring systems and all the things we have? I mean, how important is that, and you know, for you to be able to do accurate forecasting?
Sure. The only reason we have the weather infrastructure that we have now is because of the public support of science globally via tax dollars. Like, it just doesn't, forgetting about OpenSnow, forgetting about powder days, all that kind of stuff. There is no app on your phone that will work. There is no radar. There is no satellite. There is no a 7 day heads up of a potential storm. And, you know, people can make fun of weather prediction as much as they want. I know it's not perfect, but the trend line is up and to the right. The forecasts get a little bit more accurate on average every year. Tornadoes, hurricanes, snowstorms, windstorms here in Colorado. None of this is any app on your phone. The Weather Channel, AccuWeather, nothing exists without the public support of science via a few dollars of your tax dollars every year. We can all quibble with what exactly the government spends money on. I get that. Like, we're not all going to agree, but this is one thing of the monitoring of the Earth and then trying to predict the Earth and then increased monitoring of the Earth that I think we probably can all agree is incredibly useful. I'll give a little caveat to that, which is that in the last 10 to 20 years, we've shifted from all of this monitoring being done by the government and our tax dollars to some of it now being done by private companies that then will sell that data to other private companies or to consumers or even back to the government to throw into their own models. So, and in some cases, that can work quite well. Large government satellite programs can cost billions of dollars, and rightly so, because they often stay in space for 10 plus years and cover the globe, and you want that kind of reliability. But now companies are able to produce sensors for hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars instead of kind of millions and billions. And in the right situations and in low Earth orbit and things like that, private companies are able to now create an observation network that then often for less money than it would have taken the government, but then will sell that data to others, including the government. So like, even if a private company is putting up a radar or a satellite, we still need the government to be funded to purchase some of that data, incorporate it into research, incorporate it into the weather modeling, so that we're all not just reliant on kind of a walled garden of certain private sector companies. So,
Yeah.
and this is not, obviously, I know you and your organization are in this space, but this is something that I've talked about for over 10 years in all of my public talks, which is that just none of this exists without our collective tax dollars globally, not just
Yeah.
the United States, because weather is global, of observing this. So this is outside of climate change, whether you quote unquote believe the data or whatever else. Like, for anything, we need the data, right? Just
Yeah.
imagine if we didn't have any financial data, where you weren't tracking interest rates or stock markets or anything else. Like, we're all flying blind. And that's effectively the same thing here, that if we had none of this data around snowfall or temperatures or satellites or radars, like, we are flying blind. There is no way for any of us to do what we're doing. And I'll end with this example, that we released a product called StormNet in the last couple of months. And StormNet is an AI prediction scheme that predicts tornadoes, wind, hail, and lightning. It's the first of its kind in the world that we're aware of. It predicts tornadoes all the way out, the potential of a tornado or lightning from 14 days out. Obviously, we're not predicting down to the street 14 days out, but kind of a bullseye of what's interesting, all the way down to what's happening in the next 10 minutes. So it can infer from real-time data, radar, satellite, all that. Is there a potential to have a tornado on the ground, or where is the next lightning strike? Lightning is a really big deal here in Colorado, right? Like, it's not just, oh, there was a strike close by, now I should think about it. It is, hey, the clouds are building. We're looking at this tooling. We're updating this every 2 minutes. Hey, it looks like the threat of lightning has gone up from 20% to 60%. Like, you might want to think about what you're doing on your hike right now. This system that we developed couldn't have been done without kind of AI-based technology, but it also could not have been done without all of the without all of the weather data that's been collected for the last 30 years, because that's the training data for the system to work on. And because it's government funded, that data was out there, publicly available, so that the person who worked on this, his name is Andrew Brady, as an early 20-something engineer, he could just work night and weekends and scrape all this together in his spare time. And he's brilliant, but like, he didn't have to go pay somebody $1 million to get access to this data, right? So the more data that's out there and available, the more the next brilliant 15-year-old or whatever in their room could potentially come up with the next really cool thing.
Yeah. All right. So we've talked a lot about this winter, not very good. Any hopeful signs? If people bring up El Nino, La Nina, is there anything that you're seeing right now that's telling you, okay, maybe next winter will be better? Any hopeful signs?
Yes, there is. The first hopeful sign is that statistically, if this was generally the lowest snow amount that we've had in 50 years, the odds for more snow than this year for next winter are decent and
There you
even
go.
pretty
There you
high, I
go.
would say.
The
So
odds are with us.
statistically, this looks good. We do have a building a building El Nino for the 26, 27, 2026, 2027 winter season. That just means that water temperatures in the Central Pacific Ocean are warmer than average. through a lot of connections in the atmosphere, those water or warm water temperatures in the Pacific can influence weather patterns all over the world, including here in Colorado. The correlation between El Nino and La Nina. La Nina is just the cousin or the cousin of El Nino. El Nino means warmer waters. La Nina means colder waters. There's not a whole lot of correlation, honestly, between those two and snowfall here in Colorado. So you might hear people say, "Oh, it's an El Nino; it's going to be amazing." I don't know, and there's not a high correlation. What I will say, though, which is interesting, is that an El Nino, a building El Nino, and an El Nino, and a few other factors generally mean higher than average amounts of precipitation in Colorado in the spring, summer, and fall. So I am hopeful now that we talk in mid-spring, we have a massive lack of water in the state. If we could have normal or even somewhat above average precipitation in the spring, summer, and fall, which is, I mean, just largely rain, but some snow, that would be a big help. So I am hopeful for next winter, statistically speaking. But if El Nino can shift the odds toward more precipitation even before we get to next winter, we'll all take it.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds good. Well, I appreciate you talking with me. I mean, in terms of, my hope for the future, obviously little temperature increases make a big difference, and I know there's a lot that we as a society have control over. So if anyone's watching this and wants to join us and take action in some of the things we're doing to try to reduce some of the pollution that's helping to fuel some of the warming climate, then I'll put some information down below as well. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up, Joel?
Now, I would just say there's a lot of people in Colorado that aren't from Colorado, like me. And I think it's really important to remember that if you're from an area well east of Colorado, like generally the eastern half of the country, you grew up with 2 to 3 times the amount of precipitation that we generally get in most of the major city areas of Colorado. So just as a reminder, it's an arid climate here, especially along the Front Range. This is a lot of people grew up on the East Coast or in the Midwest. Generally, you get 2 to 3 times the amount of precipitation there than we get here. So even though, yes, you see lawns and grasses and trees and all that kind of stuff, it's not normal here to look like the East Coast or the eastern half of the country, and that's just a good thing to keep in mind.
Great. Well, thanks for joining me. I'll put some more information about OpenSnow down below if you want to check out what Joel is up to there. And we'll load this up on our YouTube channel as well. Please share this if you see this with other people. We want to make sure people know what's going on with our climate and how we can better predict it moving forward. So thank you very much, Joel, for joining me.
Yep, thanks for having me.